Yeah, my brothers and I growing up knew that he had been a soldier. We knew that he lost his leg in the war. And so, boy, he started pouring out these stories. And quite frankly, I don't know that my brothers and I believed him. But then when he passed away, we found his military chest with 450 letters, 3 history books, his awards, signed autographed pictures from everyone from General Eisenhower to Truscott to Young to McGarr, and then began to put together, I think you're right, what is truly an incredible story.
An excerpt from today's guest about an amazing World War II soldier whose story some have compared to a Forrest Gump-like tale. Author Walt Larimore is here, and I'll speak with him right after this break. I'm Robert Child, and this is Point of the Spear. Welcome back. Today's guest is a prolific author and has written or co-written 40 books, 30 medical textbook chapters, and over 1,000 articles. His books have garnered a number of national awards and nominations, including finalist at the 2020 International Page Turner Awards. His latest book is called At First Light, and author Walt Larimore joins us now. Walt, welcome to the show.
Rob, it's great to be with you. Thanks for the privilege.
Absolutely. Great to have you. And this book is so unique and looks so amazing. It's actually about your father. Reading through the advanced materials, I was basically stunned at what an incredible soldier he was. Could you fill our audience in on what he did and his accomplishments?
Yeah, my brothers and I growing up knew that he had been a soldier. We knew that he lost his leg in the war. We saw the war medals in his office and the signed autographs from a bunch of different generals, but he never talked about the war really until his and Mom's 50th wedding anniversary. I guess he got nostalgic and began to open up. It turns out that he had been a juvenile delinquent as a child. He was an only child. His mom and dad both worked, and as a latchkey child, he just got into a lot of trouble. So they ended up shipping him off to military school, Gulf Coast Military Academy, where he spent his high school years, graduating with honors just about the time the war began. And so he was actually sent to Officer Candidate School, OCS, when he was still 17, graduating when he was 17, and then commissioned on his 18th birthday as a second lieutenant. Sent away for training for a year. Amazing training, Rob. Initially got his paratrooper jump wings with the 82nd Airborne, and then under the 82nd was transferred to the 326 Glider Infantry, spent a year training as a company commander and glider pilot, got his glider pilot wings, special training in weapons, mines, demolitions, and then just before being shipped out was transferred over to the 30th Infantry Regiment of the 3rd Infantry Division and shipped out to Anzio and ended up fighting over 400 days as the youngest frontline officer in Europe. So he was a second lieutenant on his 18th birthday, first lieutenant at 19, captain at 20, major at 21. And on the battlefield, being a frontline officer where, Rob, in the Southern Front, the average life expectancy of a second lieutenant was 21 days. And
wow.
He fought over 400 days, was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the Silver Star with 2 oak leaf, with an oak leaf cluster, Bronze Star with oak leaf cluster, Purple Heart with 2 oak leaf clusters, turned down 3 Purple Heart nominations, had the ETO campaign medal with 4 Bronze Stars, an arrowhead, 2 presidential unit citations, the French Forget, the French Croix de Guerre with Palm. But his most treasured award, his most treasured medal, like almost all the men he fought with, was the Combat Infantryman badge. Lost his leg literally 1 month before the end of the war on April 8th. Then he spent a year in rehab where he's credited with starting equine therapy for recovering soldiers. And he fought then what he said was his toughest battle of his entire career. He fought the War Department policy of discharging all officers who were amputees. And he fought desperately to overcome what he saw as this highly discriminatory policy that in actuality saw officers with amputations as being less than fully human. and definitely not fit for service with an officer. And he thought that was a travesty. And so, boy, he started pouring out these stories. And quite frankly, I don't know that my brothers and I believed him. But then when he passed away, we found his military chest with 450 letters, 3 history books, his awards, signed autograph pictures from everyone from General Eisenhower to Truscott to Young to McCarr, and then began to put together, I think you're right, what is truly an incredible story.
Definitely. And I want to ask about a little portion of his history, because I did a film on the World War II glider pilots, Silent Wings. Did he serve on any missions as a glider pilot?
He didn't. He almost died. Now, the way they did the infantry training, glider training back then, he was at Alliance Air Base in Alliance, Nebraska. So they had the actual left seat glider pilots, if you would, and then the right seat assistant pilot, if you were a glider pilot, would have been the company commander or even the platoon leader, depending on, these were the Waco gliders. And so they could hold roughly up to 15 men, or perhaps a Jeep with 2 or 3 men. And they were actually being towed behind one of the C-7, Rob, would have been
C-47s?
Yeah. They were being towed behind a C-47, those nylon tow ropes, and got into some real bad turbulence. And actually a large Tundra Swan hit the glider pilot's windshield, broke through, knocked the glider pilot out completely. And there was so much turbulence, Dad had to pull the tow rope and really went into a crash dive, almost crashing, almost dying in that glider. Those were not the best flying. They called them flying coffins. You remember that, Rob?
Yeah.
And, but when they were getting ready to be shipped out, they left Alliance, went over to North Carolina to Fort Myer, getting ready to be shipped out. But because of his demolition training and because of what was happening on Anzio, it was basically World War I trench warfare. He was transferred out of the 322nd into the 3rd Infantry Division, went straight over to Morocco, across northern Morocco in the train, then up into Anzio, where he began over 15 months of frontline fighting.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. And one more comment about the gliders. They called every landing a crash.
and most of them were. They were basically, as you know, plywood coffins.
Yeah.
But it was something that he was quite proud of having those wings. He just never flew in combat in a glider.
Yeah, I don't blame him for that. That's for sure. Before we get into the actual book, your research on this took quite a long time, 16 years, and I saw that in your notes. And why was that?
I think it just took a long time, and the way I explain it is this. I'll tell people, what's D-Day? And of course they'll remember Normandy. Well, those were the guys on the northern front, and of course it was a terrible battle, horrible. But the guys on the southern front had 5 D-Days. In fact, the 3rd Battalion of the 30th Infantry Regiment had 7 amphibious D-Days, because they had 2 additional ones on Sicily. The northern front guys, 336 days in battle. The southern front guys, 913 days. And I'll ask people, what was the first European capital liberated? And most people will say Paris. And that was in August of 1944. But Rome was liberated 2 months before that, in June of 1944, by the Southern Front guys. And their mistake, if it was a mistake, Rob, was that they liberated Rome on June 4th and 5th of 1944. And when all of the papers in the U.S. were planning the huge headlines on June 6, 1944, about the liberation of Rome, guess what happened? Normandy. And everyone knows about the Battle of the Bulge, but almost no one knows about the Battle of the Colmar Pocket, where conditions were worse than Valley Forge. They were worse than the Battle of the Bulge. In fact, when Stephen Ambrose talked about the Battle of the Colmar Pocket, this is one of my favorite quotes of his. He says it was worse than the Battle of the Bulge. It was worse than Herkin Forest. And this is what he said. He said, it was fought in conditions so terrible that they can only be marveled at, not really imagined. Only those who were there can know. More than once in interviewing veterans of the January fighting, when I asked them to describe the cold, men involuntarily shivered. So, Rob, I had 450 letters. I had 3 history books. I read 250 World War II books. But then I had to go to the battlefields. I had to go to where the documents were. So I went to Fort Benning and Stewart, and Fort Myers and Fort Belvoir, museums in Kansas City, Waco, New Orleans, Paris, France, Columbus, Georgia, Rome, Italy, Anzio, Italy, and then the archives in New Orleans, College Park, Maryland, the War College in Carlisle, the Army Heritage Education Center in Carlisle.
You went everywhere.
Well, it was stunning, the detailed records, radio transmissions of when Dad lost his leg, the actual memoirs of soldiers, especially the Battle of Comore Pocket, the Battle of Maison Rouge. Almost no one knows about it, but it is the battle in which we literally could have lost the war. And the GIs held on by their fingernails. It was a stunningly poorly undertook battle where the Germans almost completely annihilated the GIs of the Southern Front. And then the most amazing record I found was the actual transcript of Dad's final appeal to stay in the Army. And Rob, it's sort of like, you may remember the movie A Few Good Men, where the character played by Tom Cruise faced down that crusty character played by Jack Nicholson. It was just, you can't forget that. Dad's final trial was very similar to that, facing down commanders who really felt that as an amputee, he was less than human.
I hope you're enjoying this episode. Next time, Hollywood feature film director Ron Maxwell will be here.
It's rare that if I go to a public event that somebody doesn't come in and comment on either Gettysburg or Gods and Generals. And it's, deeply appreciated. If a person come up to me and make a comment on one of those movies, it's meaningful to me.
My interview with Ron kicks off our 2-part Gettysburg narrative special, Voices from the Front, which you can hear over the July 4th weekend. And if you're enjoying this World War II episode, check out our earlier program about Ronald Spears and his band of brothers with author Jared Frederick.
One of the core elements of the book is his written correspondence with Dick Winters, because that truly gave us an insider perspective, perspectives in which they were very candid with each other about what they did and what they did not do during the Second World War. And so that was one of the really fascinating things, is that you saw these older men coming to terms with their celebrity that they were sometimes uncomfortable with.
You'll find the link to that show in this episode's description. Before we get into the story of the mission, was he successful in having the military change their policy?
He lost the battle but won the war. So he was honorably discharged, despite the support that he had from President Harry Truman, from General Young, from General Eisenhower, that sort of covert support. But that policy ended up being changed so that now we can honor both the enlisted men and women who lose limbs, and the officers, understanding that they have great value as humans, great value as officers and military personnel, and much that they can teach not just military personnel, but all of us.
I think it's going to be very surprising for the listeners that there was even a policy at that time.
Yeah, especially how we honor our amputees, and should completely rehab and completely honor these amazing men and women who go through so much and have on all of our behalf.
I agree. Now, getting to the story of the book, tell us a little bit about the mission and how he was called upon to undertake this amazing mission.
Well, I think I know the one you're talking about, but there's so many missions. I mean, he was a platoon commander of an A&P platoon, so he worked at night in no man's land, in the front lines, taking ammunition and wire to the front, setting mines, defusing mines, then becoming a company commander. He took over for Medal of Honor awardee Maurice Footsie Britz. He took over his love company. He had to train mules to deliver ammo and supplies at night, both on Anzio and in the Vosges Mountains. Rescued thousands of horses at the Montélimar ambush in southern France. And in over 400 days of fighting, countless tip of the spear attacks, countless missions fighting frontline in Italy, France, Germany. I mentioned that the average second lieutenant lived 21 days. He fought 400 days. But I think what you're probably referring to is a mission that occurred just before the end of the war.
Yes.
Because he was an equestrian, a world-class equestrian. His commander, the commander of the 30th Infantry, was an equestrian, at that time, Colonel McGarr. General Truscott was an equestrian. Of course, General Patton was an equestrian. But there were rumors that Hitler had sequestered the Lipizan horses in Czechoslovakia. He of course, had the policy of trying to develop the perfect humans, the Aryan breed.
Yeah.
And for the perfect human, he wanted to have the perfect horse. And so starting in 1938, he had veterinarians across the Nazi Empire sequester all of the royal breeds. So Andalusians and Frisians and Arabians, and thoroughbreds and Cossack stallions and Lipizans were reportedly hidden in horse farms across Czechoslovakia. And the Russians, because of the Yalta Agreement, the Russians were liberating Czechoslovakia, but because of the starvation in Russia, because of the underfeeding and undersupplying of the Russians, they were basically killing and stewing everything they could.
Yeah.
And so there were 20 so Lipizans that were in a trailer, being sent away from the area of the Eastern Front. The Russians captured the trailer, killed the Lipizans, and ate them. And so the Nazi vets that were in charge of the Lipizans became very, very concerned, contacted the Americans. And so a secret mission was devised to take a Piper cub, a pilot, and a soldier who was an equestrian, and send them secretly 200 miles behind the lines into Czechoslovakia to see if these rumors were true. Were the Lipizans there? And Dad was chosen for this secret mission. He could not reveal his identity to the pilot or the pilot to him. And he was told that if they crashed, if they were captured, he would be AWOL. He would lose his, if he was killed, he would lose his life insurance benefits. He would lose all military career. He would basically be abandoned as AWOL, but made it behind enemy lines. The vet that was in charge of the Lipizans met him. Dad actually got to ride a Lipizan and identified that, in fact, there were over 100 Lipizans sequestered there. Brought that information out successfully, and that led actually to what was later called Operation Cowboy. It was both a secret and illegal mission that General Patton approved to go in, sent a cavalry unit in actually to walk the Lipizans out of Czechoslovakia, save the Lipizans, and save that world-famous breed.
The story of this operation became a movie in the 50s.
Yeah, I did. It was called Operation Cowboy. Disney made the movie, and it was an absolute total bomb. but I think it would probably be a great movie now. Elizabeth Lett came out with a book called The Perfect Horse about Operation Cowboy. That became a New York Times best-selling book. In 1964, a wildly popular tour of the Lipizans occurred in the U.S. They became not only world famous, but U.S. famous. And then, Rob, when Dad was fighting to stay in the Army, General Eisenhower and General Carr, General Young brought him to Fort Myer in Washington, D.C. to fight the discharge that was coming. And he became the executive officer for the Caisson platoon and was called back in 1981 when 10 Lipizans were donated to the Caisson platoon at Fort Myer. Dad and Mom were invited to attend, and those horses became the white team at Arlington. They were used in military funerals for decades. And in fact, they led the inaugural parade for President Ronald Reagan and for Vice President George Bush.
Oh, wow.
So it was an amazing legacy of the Lipizans that lives on till today.
Now, your father, after the war and fighting the Army policy, did he stay in contact with any of these former commanders?
Yeah, he did. Actually, when he was in OCS, one of his trainers was First Lieutenant Ross Calvert, and it was against policy at the time, but they actually became really close friends and bridge partners. They ended up at Fort Benning playing bridge for money and making money, and then Ross was part of the 3rd Infantry Division, the 30th Infantry Regiment. So they actually fought the war together. And then afterwards, General McCarr was at Fort Myer. Ross Calvert was there as the executive officer for the honor guard at the Tombs of the Unknown. Mm-hmm. General Eisenhower was there, and in quarters 1, of course, is general for the Army. And so that year of fighting discharge, Ross Calvert and Dad played bridge with General Eisenhower almost every week. Mamie served them, served them refreshments. Mamie was also a bridge player, but she wouldn't play with the general. She said he got too animated. And the rumor at Fort Myer was that Eisenhower actually chose his command staff based upon their ability to play bridge. So,
I never heard that.
It was an interesting story. When Dad lost his leg and was being shipped out of Reims, France, General Eisenhower actually came to the hospital plane and saw him off. And then they stayed close friends throughout the years because of Dad serving as McCarr's executive officer at Fort Myer. He was in charge of the Honor Brigade, and so often at the White House, and became friends with Harry Truman. In fact, Harry Truman had been in the Army in World War I, a decorated officer, and so he would have the men, after, say, there was a big ceremony at the White House, afterwards he would have the honor guard come down into the basement kitchen, and he would have his personal bartender mix up drinks. There was a piano down there, and Truman was a piano player, and they would talk about singing when the caissons go marching in. So he kept in touch with Generals Truscott and Young. Had at least he had seen Winston Churchill at the Southern France D-Day, August 15th in 1944. And then Winston Churchill came to visit Eisenhower at Fort Myer. And so he was able to interact again with Winston Churchill. And then because he had taken over, he fought with 2 Medal of Honor awardees. One was Maurice Footsie Britz.
Right.
Footsie actually lost his arm, and Dad took over L Company, Love Company of the 3rd Battalion of the 30th Infantry. And then Dad, one of his most severe wounds, not the one in which he lost his leg, but another wound on that same leg, he was actually shipped to France, where he from northern France, from the Vosges down to southern France, where he recovered. And his bedmate was Audie Murphy. And so he became great friends with Audie Murphy. Wow. Their nurse that took care of them in the field hospital there. Audie Murphy ended up proposing to her several times. She turned him down several times. So there's these wonderful stories of these well-known people that interacted really with the frontline guys.
Such an amazing story. And the book is called At First Light. Walt, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. This has been wonderful.
It's been a treat for me. Rob, you do such a great job of honoring military men and women. They deserve to be remembered. They deserve to be honored. And when we look back at World War II, almost all of them are gone to glory now. But General Truscott, when he addressed the graves at Anzio, said this. He said, "We cannot look back on them if we don't look forward to the future for which they fought and died." And Rob, you honor that. And I'm grateful to be privileged to join you in honoring those incredible men and women.
Well, I'm humbled, sir. Thank you again. And that's it for this episode. Thanks again for joining me. Next time, Hollywood feature film director Ron Maxwell will be here.
It's rare that if I go to a public event that somebody doesn't come in and comment on either Gettysburg or Gods and Generals. And it's, deeply appreciated. A person come up to me and make a comment on one of those movies. It's meaningful to me.
My interview with Ron kicks off our 2-part Gettysburg narrative special, Voices from the Front, which you can hear over the July 4th weekend. And be sure to check out our Point of the Spear YouTube channel with bonus video material plus full military history documentaries. There's tons to explore, and I hope you check it out. I'm Robert Child, and this has been Point of the Spear.
Music licensed from audioblocks.com. Point of the Spear is produced by RSC Media Group.